He thought his mother was safe, well cared for by his daughter-in-law's family, but a call from a neighbor changes everything. Breaking into the house, he finds his mother locked in a filthy shed. From that moment on, he swears he will never again fail the woman who gave him life. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. New York City had always been a city that never slept, but for Robert Ashford, the last 10 years had passed in a grey blur of meetings, contracts, and strategic decisions. He had built an empire from scratch, transforming a small construction firm inherited from his father into one of the country's largest real estate conglomerates. Mirrored towers that tore through the Manhattan sky bore his signature. Malls, luxury condominiums, developments that changed the face of entire neighborhoods. Robert Ashford was a name that appeared in business magazines, whispered with respect in boardrooms, inspiring admiration and envy in equal measure. But behind the 62-year-old man, impeccable in his Italian suits and always with the firm posture of someone who never backed down from a challenge, there was a void that no multi-million-dollar contract could fill. Robert's life was marked by external achievements and internal losses. He had lost his son, Andrew, 15 years ago, in circumstances he preferred not to revisit in his memory. The young man was only 28 when he passed, leaving behind a young wife, Patricia, and a hole in his father's heart that would never be filled. Since then, Robert had distanced himself from almost everything that didn't involve numbers and spreadsheets. He had married twice after his son's passing, but neither relationship lasted more than 3 years. The women complained of his coldness, his inability to commit emotionally, how he always seemed distant even when physically present. And perhaps they were right. Robert had learned to protect his heart by locking it away, keeping himself too busy to feel. The only person who could still break through that wall was Gloria, his mother, a woman now in her 80s, frail and delicate like a porcelain doll, but with an inner strength that had always impressed her son. Gloria had been a seamstress her entire life, raising Robert and Andrew practically alone after her husband left them when the boys were still small. She sewed late into the night, took orders on weekends and did odd jobs ironing clothes to ensure her sons could attend good schools and never wanted for anything. When Robert began to prosper in business, the first thing he did was buy a large, comfortable house for his mother. Then came a car with a driver, private health insurance, and a generous monthly allowance. He wanted her to live with all the comfort she never had in her youth. But Gloria was always stubborn and independent. She refused to live with her son, saying she needed her own routine, her own freedom. Robert respected that, though he didn't fully understand it. When Andrew passed away, it was Gloria who held Robert together in his darkest moments. She was the one who kept him from completely falling apart, who made him promise he would carry on, that he would turn his pain into purpose. And Robert had kept that promise, diving headfirst into his business, building towers ever higher, as if with them he could touch the sky where his son now resided. Patricia, Andrew's widow, had always kept in touch with the family. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a quiet beauty and a demure manner. After Andrew's death, Patricia went through difficult times. She had no close family in New York, having come from upstate New York as a young woman. She met Andrew at a party through mutual friends and fell in love quickly. Their marriage was simple but happy. When she was widowed, Patricia found herself lost, without direction. Robert had always felt responsible for her. After all, she was the woman his son had loved. So, when Patricia suggested she could take care of Gloria, Robert saw it as a perfect solution. His mother was becoming more fragile, needed constant companionship, and he was always traveling for business, rarely managing to visit as often as he would have liked. Patricia, in turn, needed a purpose, a way to rebuild her life. The arrangement was made about 5 years ago. Patricia moved into Gloria's house, taking on the role of caregiver. Robert would provide a generous monthly allowance, more than enough money to cover all the household expenses, medications, special food, physical therapy, plus a fair salary for Patricia's work. In the beginning, everything seemed to work perfectly. Robert called every week to speak with his mother, and Gloria always said she was fine, that Patricia was a golden girl, attentive and caring. Over time, Robert's visits became less frequent. not for lack of love, but because of the frantic pace of his life. 3-4 months would go by without him being able to go there in person. But the money never failed. Every month, religiously, the transfer was made. Robert calculated everything: organic food, vitamin supplements, private medical consultations, state-of-the-art medicines, physical therapy 3 times a week, plus a generous amount for small luxuries and outings. It was nearly $10,000 a month, a fortune by the standards of most American families. Robert believed he was doing the right thing. He believed that by ensuring his mother's material comfort, he was honoring his son's memory and fulfilling his duty as a devoted son. The phone calls were always brief but reassuring. Gloria would say she was fine, that she was eating well, that Patricia took her out to get some sun in the backyard. His mother's voice seemed a little weaker each time, but Robert attributed it to her natural aging. 2 years ago, Patricia met a man named Marcus. She called Robert, nervous, asking for his permission to introduce him. Robert, always pragmatic, said she had every right to rebuild her life, that she didn't need his approval. Marcus was, according to Patricia, a self-employed salesman, hard-working and honest. Shortly after, they married in a simple ceremony. Patricia assured Robert that nothing would change, that she would continue to care for Gloria with the same affection as always, and life went on. Robert continued to build his empire, traveling to Dubai, London, Shanghai, closing multi-million-dollar deals, expanding his business. The calls to his mother remained infrequent but regular. He always asked if she needed anything, if the money was arriving on time, if she was in any pain. Gloria always said no, that everything was fine, that he didn't need to worry. But there was something in her voice that Robert couldn't identify. A subtle hesitation, a lower tone, almost a whisper. He attributed it to age, to the natural weakness of someone who had lived more than 8 decades. It never crossed his mind that it could be fear. Robert's life in New York was intense. His apartment on Park Avenue was a reflection of his success. 18th floor. Panoramic view of the city, minimalist decor by a renowned architect, works of art on the walls. But he spent little time there. He woke up at 5 in the morning, went to the gym, then headed straight to his office in Midtown Manhattan, where he stayed until late at night. Weekends were reserved for business dinners, corporate events, and a few hours of golf at the City Golf Club. He had a team of competent executives who handled the daily operations of his companies, but Robert always made a point of being involved in every important decision. He was controlling, detail-oriented, a perfectionist. His employees respected him, but few could truly get close to him. Robert kept everyone at a professional distance, avoided personal conversations, and discouraged intimacy. Marianne, his executive assistant for nearly 10 years, was one of the few who dared to breach that barrier from time to time. She was in her early 40s, extremely efficient, and possessed an impressive intuition for anticipating her boss's needs. Occasionally, Marianne would comment that Robert should take a vacation, visit his mother more often, pay attention to his personal life. He would always smile politely and change the subject. It was on a Thursday afternoon, while Robert was reviewing the plans for a new development on the Upper West Side, that his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number with a New York area code. He normally didn't answer calls from strange numbers, but something made him pick up this time. Perhaps a premonition, perhaps just the boredom of spending hours looking at architectural blueprints. The voice on the other end of the line was trembling, filled with an urgency that made Robert sit up straight in his chair. It was an elderly woman who introduced herself as Yvonne, Gloria's neighbor. Robert vaguely knew the name. His mother had mentioned a kind neighbor who lived next door a few times. What Yvonne said in the next few words made Robert's blood run cold. She spoke softly, almost whispering, as if afraid of being overheard. She said that for months she had been noticing strange things at the house next door, that she no longer saw Gloria sitting on the porch as she used to, that she heard strange noises coming from the back of the house, muffled groans that sounded like someone in pain, that Patricia and her husband would leave and return at odd hours, always with full shopping bags, while the house seemed increasingly neglected. Yvonne recounted that she had tried to talk to Patricia a few times, asking about Gloria, but always received evasive answers. She's resting. She doesn't want visitors. She's not feeling well today. The excuses varied, but the result was always the same. The elderly woman never appeared. The last straw, Yvonne said with a choked voice, was when she clearly heard the previous night the sound of someone crying, a low, desperate cry coming from the back of the house. She had stayed up all night, debating internally whether to call the police or try to contact the family first. She decided on the second option. Robert felt the world spin. His first reaction was denial. It couldn't be true. He sent money every month, generous amounts. Patricia had always been so helpful, so dedicated. How could something be wrong without him knowing? But Yvonne's voice was not that of someone making up stories. It was the voice of someone genuinely concerned, even terrified. He thanked her for the call, asked for the exact address, and promised he would go there immediately. He hung up the phone and sat for a few minutes trying to process what he had just heard. Was he overreacting? Was the neighbor just a lonely person seeing problems where none existed? But what if it was true? What if his mother was suffering while he was closing multi-million-dollar deals on the other side of the city? Robert cancelled all his meetings for the day, something he had never done before. Marianne was surprised when he rushed out of the office, saying only that he had a family emergency. He got into his car, a black Mercedes. He drove himself when not on formal business and put the address into the GPS. The house was in Queens, in the neighborhood of Astoria. Robert knew the address, of course. After all, he was the one who had bought that house for his mother years ago. But it had been over 2 years since he had been there in person. He always made excuses. He was too busy, he had trips scheduled. Gloria was fine, according to Patricia, so there was no urgency. As he drove through the congested streets of New York, Robert felt a growing anguish in his chest. What if he had failed? What if, in his obsession with building a material empire, he had neglected the one person who truly mattered? The neighbor's words echoed in his mind like a hammer. Groans, crying, isolation. How had he not noticed before? The traffic was especially heavy that afternoon. What would normally take 40 minutes ended up taking almost 2 hours. Robert tapped his fingers nervously on the steering wheel, switching lanes, honking at slower drivers, feeling his impatience and fear grow in equal measure. He called Patricia's phone 3 times, but every call went straight to voicemail. He tried the house's landline, but no one answered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Robert arrived in the neighborhood. Astoria was an older part of Queens, with single-family homes and duplexes from the 70s and 80s, tree-lined streets, and a slower pace than the financial district. The house he had bought for his mother was on a quiet street, a simple but well-maintained building, or so he believed. When Robert parked in front of the gate, his heart pounded. The house he knew, painted a pale yellow with white windows and a well-tended garden, now looked completely different. The paint was peeling, the garden was overgrown with weeds, and the rusty gate creaked in the wind. There was a palpable sense of neglect. Robert got out of the car slowly, as if moving through water. Each step toward the gate seemed to require a superhuman effort. He pushed the gate open, which gave way with a metallic screech that sent birds in the trees flying in fright. The walkway was cracked, with weeds sprouting between the stones. The front windows had closed curtains, blocking any view of the interior. Robert rang the doorbell, but there was no sound. Apparently it was broken. He knocked on the door then, 3 loud thuds that echoed down the quiet street. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again, this time harder, calling Patricia's name. He heard movement inside, hurried footsteps, muffled whispers. The door opened partially, held by a security chain. Patricia appeared in the gap, and Robert almost didn't recognize her. The woman he remembered as delicate and always well-dressed now looked disheveled. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were wrinkled, and there were deep dark circles under her eyes. But what caught Robert's attention most was her expression, a mix of surprise and something that looked very much like guilt. "Patricia," Robert said, his voice coming out firmer than he felt inside. "I need to see my mother. Now." Patricia hesitated, her eyes avoiding his direct gaze. She mumbled something about Gloria resting, that it wasn't a good time, that he should have called to say he was coming. Robert felt anger begin to boil. He didn't need to call to visit his own mother. He didn't need permission to enter the house he himself paid for. "Take off that chain and open the door, Patricia," he said, his voice low but charged with an authority that brooked no refusal. "Now." Patricia seemed to realize there was no way out. With trembling fingers, she unfastened the chain and opened the door. Robert stepped inside, and what he saw shocked him. The living room he remembered as simple but clean and cozy was now in complete disarray. There were piles of clothes scattered on the sofa, boxes stacked in the corners, a huge modern television that certainly wasn't there before, but everything around it seemed dirty and abandoned. The smell emanating from the house was disturbing, a mixture of mold, old, food and something else Robert couldn't identify, but it made his stomach churn. The once white walls were now stained, there were cracks in the ceiling, and the ceramic tile floor was covered in accumulated grime. "Where is my mother, Patricia?" Robert asked, looking around. Patricia shifted her feet nervously. "She's in the back, resting. She hasn't been well lately. She gets very confused, you know how it is." Robert didn't believe a word of it. He started walking through the house, ignoring Patricia's weak protests. He passed through the kitchen, which was in an even worse state than the living room. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, there were food scraps on the table, the floor was sticky. Robert felt nausea rising. It was then that he heard it. A low sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the back of the house. A groan. It wasn't the sound of someone sleeping or resting. It was the sound of someone in pain, someone calling for help without words. Robert ran towards the sound, crossing the narrow hallway. Patricia shouted behind him, telling him to stop, not to go back there, but he ignored her completely. He reached a door that led sort of the backyard and threw it open. The backyard was as neglected as the rest of the house. What was once a small garden was now just dry earth and scattered trash. And at the back, there was a shed. A small brick structure that Robert vaguely remembered as an old storage place for tools and gardening supplies. There was a padlock on the shed door, a new, shiny padlock, completely out of place amidst the general decay. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. Why would there be a padlock there? The sound was coming from inside that, shed. He turned to Patricia, who had stopped a few feet behind him, pale as a ghost. "Open this," he ordered, pointing to the padlock. "Robert," she tried, her voice failing. "You don't understand. She's a lot of work. She gets agitated. The doctor said it was better for her to be in a quiet place." "Doctor? What doctor?" Robert thought. He had never authorized any recent consultation, never received any report. "Open it now, Patricia, or I'll break this door down." Patricia realized she had no choice. With trembling hands, she took a key from her pocket and approached. She unlocked the padlock, which fell to the ground with a metallic clink. Robert didn't wait. He pushed the door, and it swung open heavily. The smell that came from inside was nauseating, an acrid odor of urine, mold, decay. Robert felt tears instantly well up in his eyes, both from the smell and from what he saw before him. The shed was small, no more than 10 by 10 feet. The windows were boarded up with nailed planks, preventing any natural light from entering. There was only a single weak bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting sinister shadows on the stained walls. The floor was cold, damp concrete. And there, huddled in a corner on a thin, filthy mattress, was Gloria. Robert couldn't contain the cry that escaped his throat. That skeletal, trembling figure didn't look like his mother. Her white hair was completely matted and dirty. Her pale skin stretched almost transparently over her protruding bones, her eyes sunken and glazed over. She wore a torn, filthy nightgown and was curled up as if trying to disappear into herself. When Robert took a step forward, Gloria flinched violently, a sharp sound of terror escaping her throat. She raised her weak arms over her face, as if expecting to be hit, and began to tremble uncontrollably. "Mom," Robert whispered, tears now streaming freely down his face. "Mom, it's me. It's Robert. You're safe now." But Gloria didn't seem to recognize him. Her eyes darted from side to side, frightened, lost. She muttered incomprehensible words, fragments of sentences that made no sense. Robert noticed a bucket in the corner, half full, which served as a makeshift toilet. There were scraps of old food on a cracked plastic plate. There was no blanket, no pillow, nothing but that horrible mattress. Robert knelt slowly, trying not to frighten his mother further. He reached out his hand slowly, with all the care in the world. "Mom," he said again, his voice breaking, "I'm going to get you out of here. You won't suffer anymore. I promise." Gloria looked at him for a long moment, and something seemed to click in her empty eyes. A spark of recognition. Her chapped lips moved, trying to form words. "Robert," she whispered, so low he could barely hear. "Robert, my son." And then she collapsed into silent sobs, her frail body shaking with the force of the ER. Tears that were finally allowed to fall. Robert gently pulled her into his arms, feeling how absurdly little she weighed, as if she were made of air and bones. He held her against his chest, feeling her heart beat weakly and irregularly, and silently swore that whoever had done this would pay. One way or another they would pay dearly. The next few hours unfolded like a nightmare from which Robert couldn't wake. He carried his mother in his arms, feeling every bone under her thin skin, every tremor that ran through the body that had once been strong and vibrant. Gloria weighed less than a child, and it broke Robert's heart in ways he didn't even know were possible. Patricia tried to follow them, babbling incoherent excuses, explanations that made no sense. Robert ignored her completely. His attention was entirely focused on getting his mother away from that place of horror. He carefully placed her in the back seat of the car, taking off his own jacket to cover her. Gloria continued to tremble, muttering disjointed words, her eyes still filled with a terror that tore at Robert's soul with every second. Before leaving, Robert took his phone out of his pocket and began to photograph everything. The filthy shed, the dirty mattress, the bucket that served as a toilet, the lock on the outside, the boarded-up windows. He also filmed the state of the house, the accumulated dirt, the disorder. And he recorded Patricia as she tried to explain herself, her nervous voice admitting that yes, Gloria stayed in the shed because she was a lot of work, because she got agitated, because a doctor, some Dr. Silver that no one knew, had supposedly recommended isolation. Robert didn't say a word during the recording. He just let Patricia talk, digging her own grave with every pathetic excuse she offered. When he finished, he put the phone away and got in the car. He didn't look back. He never wanted to see that house again. He didn't want to remember that for years his mother had suffered there while he believed he was doing the right thing. The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital was made in silence. Robert drove with one hand, the other stretched back, holding his mother's cold hand. Gloria had stopped murmuring and now just stared out the window with empty eyes as if she couldn't process being out of that shed, as if she couldn't believe it was real. In the hospital's emergency room, the reaction from doctors and nurses was one of immediate shock. An elderly woman in such a condition was not something they saw often, especially coming from a seemingly affluent family like Robert's. He was clear and direct in explaining the situation to the doctor on duty, a middle-aged man named Dr. Henry Taylor. Robert omitted nothing. He told them about the neglect, the state in which he found his mother, the months of isolation. Dr. Taylor ordered a series of immediate tests. Gloria was taken to an emergency room while a medical team mobilized around her. Robert stayed outside, pacing back and forth in the hospital's immaculate hallway, his hands shaking, his stomach in knots. He called Marianne and asked her to cancel all his appointments for the following week. He gave no detailed explanation, just said it was a serious family emergency. Then he called his personal lawyer, Arthur Finch, an experienced man who had handled Robert's legal affairs for over 20 years. Robert explained the situation in clinical, objective detail, even sending the photos and videos he had taken. Arthur was silent for a long moment after hearing everything, and when he finally spoke, his voice was filled with genuine indignation. "Robert, we'll take care of this," he said firmly. "I'll start the proceedings to secure your legal guardianship over Gloria immediately. And as for the other matter, we're going to need all of this evidence. What you witnessed is extremely serious. I will contact the proper authorities." Robert thanked him and hung up. He sat down in one of the hallway chairs, his head in his hands. How had he let this happen? How had he not noticed? The phone calls were always so brief, his mother's voice always so weak. Why hadn't he been suspicious? Why hadn't he visited more often? The money he sent religiously every month was too generous for so much to be left over. What was it being spent on, if not Gloria's care? The answer was obvious and nauseating. Patricia and her husband were using that money for themselves. The huge television, the shopping bags the neighbor mentioned, the frequent outings. They were living off the suffering of a helpless elderly woman. Robert felt a rage so intense that his hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. After nearly 3 hours of waiting, Dr. Taylor finally came out of the emergency room. His face was serious, concerned. He asked Robert to accompany him to his office to talk privately. Once there, with the door closed, the doctor did not mince words. "Mr. Ashford, your mother's condition is extremely serious. She is severely malnourished, which indicates she hasn't received adequate nutrition for months. She's dehydrated, with signs of several untreated infections. We found pressure sores which suggest she was left lying down for prolonged periods without the necessary care. But what worries me most is her psychological state." Robert swallowed hard. "Please continue." "She shows clear signs of severe psychological trauma, hypervigilance, extreme fear of physical proximity, dissociative responses. When we tried to examine her, she would panic, believing she was going to be punished. This is characteristic of someone who has suffered extreme stress over a prolonged period. She will need intensive psychiatric support in addition to physical care." Robert closed his eyes, feeling the tears burn. "Will she recover, Doctor?" "Physically, yes, with the right treatment and time. But psychologically, Robert," Dr. Taylor paused, choosing his words carefully, "the trauma your mother has suffered will leave scars. She may never be exactly the same person she was before. We will do everything in our power, but you need to be prepared for a long and difficult recovery process." Robert nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Taylor placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of empathy. "We'll keep her in the hospital for at least a week to stabilize her physical condition and begin psychological treatment. You can visit her, but we need it to be gradual. She's still very frightened." That night, Robert went home but couldn't sleep. He sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking at the lights of New York twinkling in the darkness, feeling like the worst son in the world. He had built an empire, accumulated wealth that would last for generations, but he had failed at the simplest and most important thing, protecting the one he loved. The following days were a blur of legal and medical procedures. Arthur moved quickly, filing a petition for emergency guardianship with the appropriate court. With the evidence provided by Robert, photos, videos, the hospital's medical reports, the judge granted temporary guardianship almost immediately. Robert was now legally responsible for all care and decisions related to his mother. In parallel, an investigation was launched. Social workers visited the house in Astoria, documenting the deplorable conditions and interviewing neighbors. Yvonne, the neighbor who made the initial call, gave a detailed statement about her months of suspicion and concern. Other neighbors also began to speak up, reporting strange things they had witnessed but had been afraid to get involved in. The investigation revealed even more disturbing things. Bank records showed that Patricia and Marcus had spent exorbitant amounts on online casinos, trips to the coast, electronics purchases, and even a new car that was now registered in Marcus's name. Almost none of the money sent by Robert was being used for Gloria's care. Even more shocking was the discovery of a life insurance policy in Gloria's name, taken out 2 years prior by Patricia. The sole beneficiary was Patricia herself. The value was $250,000. When confronted about this by investigators, Patricia claimed it was just a precaution, that Robert knew and had approved, which was a blatant lie. Robert had never authorized any insurance. The situation began to paint a sinister picture. It wasn't just negligence due to laziness or unpreparedness. There were signs that Gloria's suffering was intentional, a way to hasten the inevitable so that Patricia could collect the insurance money. The discovery made Robert feel physically ill. The woman he had trusted, who had been married to his son, was planning to let his mother waste away. While all this unfolded in the legal realm, Robert spent every afternoon at the hospital visiting his mother. The first few visits were painful. Gloria barely reacted to his presence, remaining curled up in the hospital bed, her eyes fixed on some distant point. The doctors explained that this was normal, that she was processing the trauma, trying to understand that she was now safe. But Robert was persistent. He arrived at the same time every day, brought fresh flowers that he placed on the bedside table, and spoke to her in a low, calm voice, telling her about his day, about future plans, about how she would soon be in a new, beautiful and comfortable home where she would never have to be afraid again. It was on the 5th visit that something magical happened. Robert was sitting by the bed, flipping through an old photo album he had brought from home, showing his mother pictures of when she was young, when Andrew was a child, when they were a happy family. Suddenly, Gloria reached out a trembling hand and touched one of the photos. It was a picture of Andrew at 5 years old, smiling with a soccer ball in his hands. "My boy," she whispered, the first complete sentence she had spoken since the rescue. "My Andrew." Robert felt tears well up. "Yes, Mom, your Andrew. He loved you so much." Gloria turned her face to Robert then, truly looking at him for the first time since he found her. Tears ran down her wrinkled face. "You came," she said, her voice breaking. "You finally came to get me." Robert took her hand in his, feeling how cold and fragile it was. "I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry it took me so long, but you're safe now. I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Gloria nodded weakly and closed her eyes, but she didn't let go of her son's hand. For the first time in days, Robert felt a glimmer of hope. She was still in there. The strong woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything for her children, was still somewhere inside that frail body, and he was going to do everything he could to bring her back. Meanwhile, in the world outside the hospital, a storm was brewing. The investigation into Patricia and Marcus gained media attention when an investigative journalist learned of the case through contacts in the police force. The story of an elderly woman kept in inhumane conditions while her caregiver embezzled the money meant for her care was the kind of report that shocked and outraged the public. Robert initially wanted to keep everything private, to protect his mother's privacy and avoid a media circus, but Arthur convinced him otherwise. Public exposure could help, not only to ensure that Patricia and Marcus were held accountable for what they did, but also to bring a larger problem to light: the alarming number of elderly people who suffer from neglect and abuse across the country. The report aired on a Monday night on one of the country's major news channels. The names were kept anonymous, of course, but the details were shocking enough. Photos of the shed, testimonies from neighbors, statements from doctors about the victim's condition. The backlash was immediate and massive. Social media erupted with indignation. Politicians made statements. Elderly rights organizations called for justice. Patricia and Marcus, realizing the gravity of the situation, hired a lawyer and began a public defense campaign. Patricia gave a tearful interview to a television program, claiming she was exhausted, that caring for an elderly woman with mental health issues was very difficult, that she never intended to cause harm, that she was as much a victim as Gloria. She painted Marcus as the true villain, alleging that he pressured her, controlled the finances, that she was afraid of him. The performance was convincing enough to win sympathy from some people. Comments on social media were divided. Some defended Patricia, saying that caregivers burn out and need support. Others condemned her vehemently, pointing to the evidence of embezzlement and the suspicious life insurance policy. Robert watched Patricia's interview with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How dare she play the victim after everything she had done? But Arthur calmed him down, explaining that it was a common strategy and that it wouldn't work in the face of the concrete evidence they possessed. Indeed, when the case file was formally presented, including bank records, neighbor testimonies, detailed medical reports, and Robert's own recordings, Patricia's narrative began to crumble. Her lawyer tried to argue that the conditions were exaggerated in the photos, that Gloria was receiving care, but none of it held up against the documented reality. An unexpected twist came when Patricia's aunt, a woman named Teresa who lived upstate, contacted Robert's lawyer. She was horrified by what her niece had done and wanted to help. Teresa revealed that Patricia had always been problematic with money, had accumulated debts in the past, that her marriage to Marcus had been too quick, and that she suspected he had a negative influence on her niece. Most importantly, Teresa had copies of messages Patricia had sent her months before, complaining that Gloria was too much work and that she was thinking of putting her in a nursing home, but that Robert would never agree. There was even a disturbing message where Patricia commented that if Gloria's health naturally worsened, it would be a relief for everyone. These messages were crucial in dismantling Patricia's defense. She wasn't an exhausted caregiver who made mistakes out of fatigue. She was someone who consciously neglected an elderly woman under her care, misappropriated resources intended for her, and apparently hoped the situation would resolve itself in the worst possible way. As the legal battle intensified, Robert focused on what truly mattered: his mother's recovery. After 10 days in the hospital, Gloria was discharged, but with an extensive list of necessary care. Robert didn't think twice. He hired the best professionals available: a private daytime nurse, a nighttime caregiver, a physical therapist, a nutritionist, and crucially a psychologist specializing in trauma. He also made the decision to have his mother live with him. His Park Avenue apartment would need modifications, but that was no problem. Robert hired a remodeling company, and within days, one of the bedrooms was transformed into a space completely adapted to Gloria's needs. The room turned out beautiful and welcoming: an electric hospital bed, but with soft, beautiful linens, adjustable lighting with options for soft, warm light, a sound system that played classical music, which Gloria had always loved, a comfortable armchair near the window from where she could watch the city's movement, and, crucially, no locks on the doors. Robert made sure of that. His mother needed to know she could leave whenever she wanted, that she would never be imprisoned again. The day he brought her home was both emotional and tense. Gloria was visibly nervous during the entire car ride. She looked out the window with a frightened expression, as if expecting to be taken back to that horrible place. When they entered the building and went up in the elevator, she started to tremble again. Robert held her hand the whole way, speaking softly, assuring her that everything was okay, that she was going to her new home where she would be cared for and loved. When he opened the apartment door and led her inside, Gloria stood still in the foyer, looking around with wide eyes. Robert took her to the room prepared especially for her. When Gloria saw that cozy space with fresh flowers in a vase, framed photos on the wall showing happy family moments, the soft light streaming through the window, she began to cry. But this time, they weren't tears of terror. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally being able to believe that the nightmare was over. "Is it mine?" she asked in a trembling voice, pointing to the bed. "Can I sleep there?" Robert had to swallow the lump in his throat to answer. "It's all yours, Mum. This is your home now. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. You'll never have to be afraid again." Gloria sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the soft comforter, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then she looked at her son with an expression that mixed so many emotions that Robert felt his chest tighten. "Thank you, son," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Robert knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Never, Mom, I would never give up on you. And I'm so sorry I didn't realize sooner, but I promise I'll make it up to you. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. You will never be alone again." And in that moment, with the afternoon light streaming through the window, illuminating his mother's tired but finally peaceful face, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. The empire could wait. The meetings could be rescheduled. The contracts could be signed by others. None of it mattered if he wasn't there, in that room, holding the hand of the woman who gave him life and who now needed him to give her back her dignity. The first few weeks with Gloria at home were a daily lesson in patience, love, and resilience. Robert discovered that caring for someone who had suffered so much trauma was not simply a matter of providing material comfort. It was about rebuilding trust word by word, gesture by gesture, day after day. Gloria had good days and terrible days. On the good days she could smile, eat a little more, even comment on the news she watched on television. But on the bad days, she would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, believing she was back in the shed. She would hide food under her pillow as if afraid she would be denied food again. She would flinch when someone approached too quickly, her eyes wide with terror. The psychologist, Dr. Clara Mendez, was a woman in her 50s with a soft voice and infinite patience. She explained to Robert that the trauma Gloria had suffered was deep and that recovery would be non-linear. There would be progress and setbacks, moments of hope and moments of despair. The important thing was to maintain consistency, create predictable routines, and make Gloria feel that she had control over her own life. Robert followed every instruction to the letter. He established fixed meal times, always served in his mother's room until she felt comfortable enough to eat in the living room. He hired Clara, a kind and experienced 40-year-old nurse who quickly won Gloria's trust. Clara had a special way of speaking, always announcing her intentions before touching, always asking for permission, always respecting the elderly woman's boundaries. Slowly, very slowly, Gloria began to blossom again. She gained weight, her cheeks regained some color, and her eyes began to sparkle again. She started to take an interest in small things. The flowers Robert brought every week, the stories Clara told about her grandchildren, the music that played softly in her room. A month after moving in with Robert, Gloria surprised everyone by asking to have dinner in the living room. It was a simple but profoundly significant moment. Robert set a table with special care, using the best china and lighting candles. When Gloria came out of her room, leaning on Clara, and saw the table set with such love, her tears began to fall again. "No need to cry, Mom," Robert said softly, pulling out a chair for her. "This is the beginning. From now on, every day will be better than the last." And in many ways, it was. Gloria began to venture around the apartment, exploring the other rooms, getting used to her new home. Robert transformed the balcony into a small garden with pots of flowers and aromatic herbs because his mother had always loved plants. She would spend hours there tending to the flowers, talking softly to them, finding peace in that small piece of nature in the middle of the metropolis. But while Gloria's recovery progressed within the protective bubble Robert had created, the outside world remained turbulent. The legal battle against Patricia and Marcus intensified. Arthur worked tirelessly, building a solid case. The evidence was overwhelming. Misappropriation of funds, proven neglect, the suspicious life insurance policy, the messages obtained from Teresa. Patricia, realizing that her narrative of an exhausted caregiver was falling apart, changed her strategy. Her lawyer began to attack Robert, suggesting he was an absent son who had neglected his own mother for years and was now looking for a scapegoat for his own guilt. In carefully orchestrated interviews, Patricia insinuated that Robert had never truly cared about Gloria, that he only showed up when it was too late. The accusations were like daggers to Robert's heart. He knew there was truth in them. He had indeed been absent, had trusted too blindly, had failed to protect his mother. But to turn his failures into an excuse for what Patricia had done was grotesque and unacceptable. The situation took on a new dimension when a distant relative of Patricia's, a businessman named Owen Riley, became involved in the case. Owen owned a chain of supermarkets in upstate New York and had significant political connections. He presented himself as a protector of the family, claiming Patricia was being unfairly persecuted and that he would use all his resources to defend her. Owen began to apply pressure behind the scenes, trying to discredit the evidence, suggesting the medical reports were exaggerated, that the photos had been manipulated. He even got some local politicians to make statements questioning the process. The tactic was clear: to turn what should have been a clear-cut case of justice into a murky political and media issue. Robert, who had always avoided the spotlight and preferred to solve problems discreetly in corporate backrooms, found himself being dragged into a public arena he didn't know well. Reporters started showing up at his building, trying to get statements. His name, once associated only with business success, now appeared in headlines about a case of family neglect. The pressure began to affect other aspects of Robert's life as well. Some of his top executives began to question his growing absence from the company's daily operations. Robert had delegated almost everything to his team, while he dedicated himself to his mother's care and the legal battle. For a man who had always controlled every detail of his business, this was a radical change. In a tense meeting with the executive board, Charles Mendoza, the CFO and one of Robert's oldest collaborators, expressed concerns about the company's direction. "Robert, with all due respect, you need to decide where your priorities are. The company is losing contracts because you're not available to close deals. Investors are nervous. Your absence is costing us money." Robert looked around the boardroom, seeing concerned faces, some genuinely worried about him, others worried only about their own interests. He took a deep breath before answering. "My priorities, Charles, are exactly where they should be. I built this company for decades, sacrificing everything, including my family. And for what? To accumulate money, to have more towers with my name on them. My mother almost lost her life because I was too busy building an empire. So yes, my priorities have changed now." The silence that followed was heavy. Charles was the first to speak again, his voice softer. "We understand, Robert, and we admire your dedication to Gloria, but you need to find a balance. The company needs you too." Robert knew Charles was partly right, but he also knew he wouldn't divide his attention now. His mother needed him, so he made a decision that shocked everyone in the room. "I'm taking a temporary leave of absence from the executive presidency. Charles, you'll take over as interim CEO. I'll remain as chairman of the board and will be available for key strategic decisions, but the day-to-day management will be yours." The room erupted in protests and questions. Robert raised his hand, asking for silence. "This is not an impulsive decision. It's a necessary one. I trust each of you to keep the company running, and when the time is right, I will return completely. But right now, I need to be with my mother." The news of Robert's temporary leave obviously leaked to the press. Speculation began immediately. Some outlets suggested it was the beginning of the end for his empire. Others spoke of a mental health crisis. Nervous investors began selling shares. The market value of his companies dropped significantly in a matter of days. Marianne, his loyal assistant, tried to mitigate the damage, issuing official statements clarifying it was a planned temporary leave. But public perception was hard to control. Robert Ashford, the invincible businessman, was showing weakness, and in the business world, weakness was blood in the water for sharks. At home, Robert tried to shield his mother from all the turmoil. Gloria no longer watched the news or read newspapers. Robert wanted her to focus solely on her recovery, without the added pressure of knowing the circus their lives had become. But his mother was more perceptive than he imagined. One afternoon, as they were on the balcony tending to the plants together, Gloria stopped watering the flowers and looked directly at her son. "You're sacrificing everything for me, aren't you?" she asked softly. Robert tried to deny it, but his mother raised her hand, interrupting him. "Don't lie to me, son. I see the exhaustion in your eyes. I hear you on the phone late at night, dealing with problems. Clara tells me things, even when you ask her not to." Robert sighed, sitting down in one of the balcony chairs. "It's not a sacrifice, Mom. It's doing what's right. I spent decades building things that don't truly matter. You matter, your recovery matters." Gloria sat beside him, her wrinkled hands holding his. "I don't want you to lose everything you've built because of me. Your father left you when you were a child, and I worked myself to the bone to give you and Andrew a better life. You achieved all the dreams I had for you. Don't throw that away." Robert felt tears burn. "But what good is having everything if I lose you? What good is being successful if I fail to protect the one I love? Andrew is already gone. I'm not going to lose you too." Gloria caressed her son's face, a motherly gesture he hadn't received in years. "You're not going to lose me. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm recovering. But you need to live your life too. You can't lock yourself in here with me." "I will live," Robert promised, "but on my terms now. No longer as a slave to meetings and contracts. I'll find a balance. But you come first, Mom. Always." While this intimate conversation was taking place on the other side of the city, events were unfolding that would change the course of everything once again. Patricia's lawyer had found a technical loophole in the case. He argued that Gloria, due to her compromised mental state, could not be considered a reliable witness. Without her direct testimony, much of the case relied on circumstantial evidence and third-party accounts. The judge, an experienced but cautious man named Judge Ronald Kavanaugh, decided it was necessary to hear from Gloria in person. He ordered a hearing to be held, but considering the elderly woman's fragile state, he allowed it to take place at the hospital where she was, initially treated, in a specially prepared room with only essential personnel present. When Arthur informed Robert about the hearing, he was terrified. His mother had barely begun to recover. Forcing her to relive the trauma, to speak about what she had suffered in the presence of strangers, could destroy all the progress she had made. He pleaded for another way, but Arthur was clear. It was either this or the case could be dismissed for lack of conclusive evidence. Robert had to sit down with Gloria and explain the situation. He expected her to refuse, to panic, to be unable to face it. But to his surprise, after a few minutes of thoughtful silence, she nodded. "I have to do this, son. Not for me, but for other people who might be going through what I went through. If I don't speak, she gets away with it and could do it to someone else." His mother's courage left Robert speechless. This frail, traumatized woman was willing to face her demons so that justice could be served. He had never admired her more than in that moment. The hearing was scheduled for a week later. In the meantime, Dr. Mendez worked intensely with Gloria, preparing her emotionally for what was to come. She taught her breathing techniques, ways to stay centered if she started to panic, and strategies for dealing with traumatic memories when they arose. Clara, the nurse, was also a crucial support. She would be present throughout the hearing by Gloria's side, ready to intervene if necessary. Robert would be there too, of course. He would never let his mother face this alone. On the morning of the hearing, Robert woke up early. He found Gloria already awake as well, sitting on the balcony, watching the sunrise over New York City. He sat beside her in silence, just offering his presence. After a few minutes, she spoke without taking her eyes off the horizon. "You know what I thought about all those days in that horrible place? I thought that nobody cared, that I was a burden, an inconvenience, that it would be easier for everyone if I just disappeared. And I almost believed it." Robert felt his throat tighten. "Mom." She turned to look at him, her clear eyes reflecting the dawn light. "But then you showed up, and you showed me I was wrong. That I am loved. That my life has value. So today, when I go into that room and tell them what happened, I won't just be doing it for justice. I'll be proving to myself that I am strong, that I survived, that I am worthy." Robert hugged her then, and she let herself be hugged without flinching, without trembling. It was another milestone in her recovery, being able to accept physical proximity without fear. "You're the strongest person I know," he whispered, "and I'll be by your side every step of the way." The drive to the hospital was silent. Clara sat in the back with Gloria, holding her hand. Arthur met them at the entrance along with Dr. Mendez. Judge Kavanaugh, showing consideration for Gloria's condition, had agreed to make the hearing as informal as possible. No robes, no elevated bench, just a conversation in a comfortable room. When they entered the prepared room at the hospital, Robert saw Patricia for the first time since the day of the rescue. She was sitting next to her lawyer, visibly nervous. When her eyes met Robert's, she quickly looked away. Marcus was not present. Apparently, the lawyer had decided his presence could be detrimental. Gloria, however, looked directly at Patricia, and in that gaze there was no fear. There was something Robert recognized as pure strength. His mother was no longer the terrified victim huddled in a shed. She was a survivor, ready to tell her story. Judge Kavanaugh, a man in his 60s with grey hair and a kind gaze, opened the hearing by explaining that this was not a formal trial, but an opportunity for Gloria to share her experience, if and how she felt comfortable. He made it clear that she could stop at any time, that she would not be pressured, that she was there voluntarily. Gloria nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. Clara sat beside her, and Robert stood just behind, close enough for his mother to know he was there. The judge asked a few simple initial questions: her full name, age, how long she had lived with Patricia. The answers came in a low but firm voice, and then the judge asked the crucial question: "Could you please describe what your days were like at Mrs. Patricia's house?" Gloria closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as Dr. Mendez had taught her. When she opened them again and began to speak, her voice was faint, but every word was clear, and as she told her story, everyone in that room was transported to the hell she had lived through. The progressive isolation, the meals that became increasingly scarce, the days she was left alone, not knowing if anyone would come. And finally, the shed. The dark, cold place where she had been forgotten, where each day seemed to last an eternity, where she had lost hope that anyone would ever come for her. When she finished, there were tears in the eyes of everyone in the room. Even Patricia's lawyer seemed shaken. Patricia kept her head down, refusing to look at Gloria. The judge thanked her with an emotional voice for her courage in sharing something so painful. But Gloria wasn't finished. She looked directly at Patricia then and said something no one expected. "I forgive you, Patricia, not for what you did, but for myself. Because carrying hatred would only hurt me more. But I hope you understand what you did, and that you never do it to anyone else." The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia finally looked up, tears streaming down her face, but she said nothing. There was nothing she could say. Gloria's dignity and strength had spoken louder than any legal defense ever could. The months following the hearing brought profound changes to the lives of Robert and Gloria. The elderly woman's testimony had a devastating impact on Patricia's case. Judge Kavanaugh, clearly moved by the testimony, made swift and firm decisions. Robert's guardianship over his mother was confirmed permanently. Patricia was forbidden from any contact with Gloria and had to formally answer for her crimes. The investigations revealed the deep web of manipulation. Marcus, who had tried to stay in the shadows, was eventually identified as the main orchestrator of the embezzlement scheme. It was discovered that he had a history of involvement in dubious situations, always using others as a front. Patricia, who was initially painted by her own lawyer as a victim of her husband, saw her defense crumble when it became clear she had actively participated in everything. The life insurance policy in Gloria's name was immediately cancelled, and the insurance company began its own investigation into possible fraud. The embezzled amounts over the years were calculated. They exceeded $150,000. Robert didn't need the money, but he insisted it be restituted as part of the justice process. Owen Riley, the influential relative who had tried to protect Patricia using political connections, quietly stepped away when he realized the case was lost, and that continued association with it would only tarnish his own reputation. The attempts to discredit the evidence and manipulate public opinion failed in the face of Gloria's powerful testimony and the overwhelming volume of documentary proof. At home, life began to find a new rhythm. Gloria continued therapy with Dr. Mendez, making steady progress. The nightmares still came occasionally, but with less frequency and intensity. She had gained nearly 20 pounds since her rescue. Her face had regained its expressiveness, and the light had returned to her eyes. A particularly touching transformation was her relationship with food. In the beginning, Gloria couldn't eat without anxiety, always afraid her plate would be taken away, that it would be her last meal. She would hide pieces of bread in her room, store fruit in her drawers. Clara and Robert worked patiently to reverse this, ensuring she knew there would always be food available, that she would never go hungry again. Slowly, Gloria began to rediscover the pleasure of eating. Robert discovered that his mother had a passion for cakes, especially the lemon pound cake she used to make when her sons were little. So he hired a pastry chef to teach Gloria how to bake again, as a form of occupational therapy. The apartment kitchen, once rarely used as Robert always ate out or ordered delivery, was transformed into a space of creation and joy. On Saturday mornings, Gloria would wake up early, put on her favorite apron, a gift from Robert with embroidered flowers, and begin preparing her creations. The apartment would fill with the wonderful aroma of baking cake, and Robert learned to value these simple moments more than any business meeting. The balcony remained Gloria's favorite place. She had expanded her small garden, now growing cherry tomatoes, basil, rosemary, and even peppers. She talked to the plants as if they were friends, telling them stories of her youth, of raising her children. Robert would sometimes sit there and just listen, learning about a mother he had never truly known. So absorbed had he always been in his own life and ambitions. But it wasn't all. Peace and quiet recovery. Robert faced his own battles. The corporate world he had built for decades was in turmoil. His leave of absence from the executive presidency, though temporary, had caused bigger waves than he had anticipated. Charles Mendoza, though competent, lacked Robert's strategic vision, and some questionable decisions began to affect the bottom line. Furthermore, rumors and speculation continued. Competitors took advantage of the situation to try and poach clients. Nervous investors pressed for clarity on the future of leadership. Some key executives began receiving offers from rival companies. The empire Robert had spent decades building was showing signs of fragility. Marianne, ever loyal, came to the apartment twice a week to update Robert on the most urgent matters. She brought piles of documents to sign, reports to review, decisions only he could make. Robert attended to everything, but his mind and heart were no longer fully there. He would take business calls while looking out the window at the balcony where Gloria tended her plants, and wonder what the true definition of success really was. One afternoon, during one of Marianne's visits, Gloria appeared in the living room with a tray holding a freshly baked orange cake and fresh coffee. She smiled shyly at Marianne, still a little uncomfortable with strangers, but clearly making an effort. "I thought you two might like a little snack," she said softly. Marianne, who knew the whole story, was visibly moved. "Gloria, I would love that. And may I say this apartment is infinitely more welcoming since you arrived." Gloria blushed slightly at the compliment, served the cake and coffee, and then discreetly retreated back to the balcony. When she left, Marianne looked at Robert with an expression that mixed admiration and concern. "She's so much better. You did the right thing, Robert." He nodded, but Marianne noticed the tension in his shoulders. "But you're being torn apart in the process, aren't you?" she observed gently. "Between caring for her and trying to save the company, you're exhausting yourself." Robert sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "I don't know what to do anymore, Marianne. The company needs me, but my mother does too. And every time I think about going back completely, about resuming that insane life of travel and endless meetings, I look at her and I can't abandon her again." Marianne thought for a moment before replying. "What if it wasn't a matter of choosing one or the other? What if you could redefine how the company works? You've always been a centralizer, Robert, always wanted to control every detail, but you have a competent team. What if you trusted them more? What if you restructured to be less dependent on you being physically present every day?" The idea planted a seed in Robert's mind. Over the next few days, he reflected deeply on the future. He had long conversations with Gloria, who surprisingly had very clear opinions on the matter. "Son," she said one evening, as they had dinner together, "you built something important. Not just for you, but for the hundreds of people who work for you, who depend on those jobs. You can't just throw that away, but you also can't go back to being the man you were, so absorbed in work that you forgot to live." Robert knew she was right, so he began to work on a plan. He spoke with management consultants, studied corporate governance models, analyzed companies that managed to function without the constant presence of their founders, and slowly a new model began to take shape. He called an extraordinary meeting of the executive board. Everyone attended, anxious for news of his return. Robert presented his proposal, a complete restructuring of the company's governance. He would remain as chairman of the board and majority shareholder, but the day-to-day management would be professionalized permanently. Charles would be confirmed as the permanent CEO, but with a strengthened executive team and greater decision-making autonomy. Robert also proposed something radical: to transform part of the company into a non-profit foundation dedicated to combating elder neglect. The idea had emerged during his long conversations with Gloria and Dr. Mendez. The United States had millions of vulnerable seniors, many suffering in silence with no one to defend them. Robert wanted to use his resources and influence to change that. The proposal was met with mixed reactions. Some executives were enthusiastically supportive, seeing not only the social value, but also the potential to improve the company's public image. Others were skeptical, worried about the cost and potential distraction from the core business. But Robert made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. It was the path he had chosen. The foundation was named the Andrew and Gloria Foundation, honoring both the son who had passed and the mother who had survived. Robert personally invested $10 million as initial capital. The mission was multifaceted: to create reporting centers and support for at-risk seniors, to train professional caregivers in ethical practices, to offer free legal support for families in situations of neglect, and to advocate for stronger elder protection laws. Gloria, when she learned the name of the foundation, wept copiously. But this time, they were tears of joy and pride. Her suffering, as horrific as it had been, would now have a greater purpose. It would help prevent others from going through what she had endured. The news of the foundation's creation had a national impact. The media, which had previously speculated about Robert's crisis, now portrayed him as a businessman who had transformed personal tragedy into social action. Interview requests poured in daily. Robert declined most, but agreed to participate in a television program dedicated to social issues, where he could speak openly about the importance of protecting the elderly. In the interview, which aired on a Sunday night and reached an impressive audience, Robert was transparent in a way he had never been before. He spoke of his failure to protect his mother, of the guilt he carried, of how he almost lost what truly mattered in the pursuit of material success. And he spoke of Gloria's strength, her capacity for forgiveness, her incredible resilience. The show's producers wanted Gloria to participate in the interview, but Robert firmly refused. His mother had already suffered enough exposure. She deserved peace and privacy. However, Gloria insisted. She wanted to speak, wanted her voice to be heard, wanted other victims to know they were not alone. So, in a decision that left Robert both proud and worried, Gloria agreed to give a brief statement. She appeared on screen for only 5 minutes, but those minutes were powerful. With a firm voice, she broadly outlined her experience, without going into graphic detail, but making clear the suffering she had been through. And she ended with a direct message. If you are an elderly person and you are suffering, know that there are people who care, that there are places to seek help. And if you know an elderly person at risk, do not remain silent. Your silence could cost a life. The impact was immense. In the days following the program's broadcast, the Andrew and Gloria Foundation received hundreds of reports and requests for help. The team, still small, was quickly expanded to handle the demand. Shocking stories began to emerge, confirming that the problem was much larger than society admitted. Robert found himself leading a movement that transcended his original business. He organized conferences, mobilized other business leaders to contribute, and worked with legislators to propose changes to elder protection laws. It was a different kind of empire he was building now, an empire of compassion and social change. While all this was happening in the outside world, the domestic life of Robert and Gloria continued its own evolution. She no longer needed a full-time nurse. Clara still visited regularly, but more as a friend than a professional. Gloria had gained enough independence to take care of herself for the most part. She began to make friends in the building. There were other elderly ladies living there, and slowly Gloria opened up to social interactions. A small group formed that met weekly for tea and conversation. Robert watched these interactions with joy, seeing his mother rebuild not only her physical and mental health, but also her social life and sense of community. 1 year after the rescue, Robert organized a small celebration. It wasn't a birthday or any specific date, but he wanted to mark his mother's journey of recovery. He invited only close people: Clara, Marianne, Dr. Mendez, Arthur, and Gloria's new friends from the building. The party was simple but full of meaning. Gloria prepared several cakes, proudly displaying her rediscovered skills. She wore a new dress, light blue with flowers, chosen especially for the occasion. Her hair, now well cared for and styled, was held back with a decorative clip that was a gift from Robert. During the party, Robert asked for everyone's attention and made a toast. He looked at his mother, his eyes shining with restrained emotion. "A year ago," he began, his voice firm but filled with feeling, "I almost lost the most important person in my life, and it was my fault. I was so obsessed with building things, with succeeding, with proving my worth to the world, that I forgot to take care of what really mattered." Gloria tried to interrupt him, but he gently shook his head. "Let me finish, Mom. This year has been the hardest and the most important of my life. I saw you at most fragile, but I also saw the incredible strength you possess. You taught me that success isn't measured in towers built or contracts signed. It's measured in shared love, in preserved dignity, in transformed lives." He raised his glass. "So I make this toast, not to the past we cannot change, but to the future we will build together. A future where no elderly person has to suffer in silence, where families truly care for one another, where humanity prevails over ambition. And I thank you, Mom, for your courage, your strength, and for giving me a second chance to be the son you always deserved." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Gloria stood up, her steps firm now, without needing support, and hugged her son. "I'm proud of you, son," she whispered in his ear. "So proud. And I know Andrew would be too." In the following months, life found a balance Robert had never imagined possible. He remained involved in his business, but in a more balanced, more humane way. He spent mornings working, but was always home for lunch with his mother. Afternoons were divided between foundation meetings and quality time with Gloria. Evenings were sacred, reserved for dinners together, for watching old movies she loved, for simply being present. The Andrew and Gloria Foundation flourished. It expanded to other cities, rescued hundreds of seniors from situations of neglect, trained thousands of caregivers, and influenced important legislative changes. Robert discovered that making a real difference in people's lives brought a satisfaction that no corporate profit ever had. Gloria also found her role in the foundation. She began participating in awareness campaigns, giving her testimony at events, becoming a powerful voice for those who could not speak for themselves. Her courage in sharing her story, painful as it was, inspired countless other victims to seek help. As for Patricia and Marcus, they faced the consequences of their actions. The legal proceedings moved forward, the embezzled funds were restituted, and legal measures were imposed. Robert felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a sense that justice had been served. He carried no hatred, only a deep sadness for how things had unfolded. Patricia had lost not only her freedom and reputation, but also any connection to the family that had once welcomed her. 2 years after the rescue, on a spring afternoon, Robert and Gloria were on the balcony, as they often were. The small garden was in full bloom, the plants lush. The city of New York stretched out below them, pulsating and alive. Gloria was watering the tomatoes while Robert read a report from the foundation. Suddenly she stopped and looked at her son. "Robert," she called softly. He looked up. "I want to tell you something." He put the report aside, giving her his full attention. "What is it, Mom?" Gloria sat in the chair next to him, her hands still holding the watering can. "You know, when I was in that dark place," she began, and Robert realized it was the first time she had referred to the shed so directly. "I thought a lot about my life, about the mistakes I made, the things I didn't do. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't being there. It was thinking that you and Andrew didn't know how much I loved you, that I had failed to show it properly." Robert felt his throat tighten. "Mum, we always knew." She shook her head gently. "You knew I worked hard for you. But did you know that every moment away was torture? That I would rather have been with you than anywhere else? I was so worried about giving you a better future that maybe I didn't give you enough of the present." Robert took her hand. "You gave us everything, literally everything. And now I understand better than ever the sacrifice that was." Gloria smiled, that smile Robert had learned to cherish as the most precious treasure. "But you know what I've realized these past few years? That it's not too late, that we still have time. Time to be together, to create new memories, to simply be mother and son, without all the weight of the past." "And that's exactly what we're doing," Robert said, his voice emotional. "Every day, Mom. Every single day." Gloria looked at the horizon, at the city she now associated not with terror, but with a new beginning. "You know what's funny?" she mused aloud. "That woman who left me in that place thought she was taking my life away, but actually she gave me a new one, because you found me, because you chose to change, because together we created something beautiful from the horror. The foundation is saving lives, Robert, lives of people, like me. That's redemption." Robert felt the tears but didn't try to hide them. "Mum, you're the one who gave us redemption. Me. All those seniors we're helping. Even the society that is finally paying attention to this problem. Your strength, your willingness to turn trauma into purpose. That's what changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence after that, just enjoying each other's presence, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of the flowers Gloria had cultivated with such care. And Robert thought about how strange life was. He had spent decades building an empire of concrete and steel, believing that it defined his worth. But it was only when that empire began to crack, only when he was forced to confront his deepest failings, that he discovered what it truly means to build something that lasts. It wasn't buildings or companies. It was love. It was family. It was making a difference in people's lives in concrete, meaningful ways. It was being present. It was choosing humanity over ambition, connection over conquest. And as the sun began to set over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Robert knew with absolute certainty that he was finally where he was supposed to be. Not at the top of an office tower, not in a boardroom closing multi-million-dollar deals, but there, on that simple balcony, beside the mother he had almost lost, tending to a garden that symbolized hope and new beginnings. Gloria looked at him in that moment as if sensing his thoughts. She reached out her hand and he took it. "Thank you, son," she said simply. "For what, Mum?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me that there is still goodness in the world. For turning the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that can help so many others. For giving me a reason to wake up every morning and know that my life has purpose." Robert squeezed her hand. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. For your strength. For teaching me what really matters. For giving me a second chance. I love you, Mum. More than any words can express. And I love you, son. Always have. Even in the darkest moments, that love was what kept me alive. The hope that one day you would come, and you did. You always come. That's the of son you are." They watched the sun set completely, giving way to the first stars of the night. And there, in that perfect moment of peace and love, both Robert and Gloria knew they had found the happy ending that neither of them thought possible. It wasn't a fairy tale ending without problems or challenges. It was something better. It was real. It was theirs. And it was enough. Gloria went back to tending her plants, humming an old song softly. Robert watched her with a smile, feeling a fulfillment that no amount of money could ever buy. And as the city continued its frantic pace below, up on that balcony, time seemed to move differently. Slower, more meaningful, more human. And Robert, who had once built an empire to prove his worth to the world, now understood that he had always had worth. Not for what he had conquered or accumulated, but simply for being who he was, for being capable of love, of change, of growth, for being the son of an extraordinary woman who had taught him, through her own journey of suffering and survival, the true meaning of strength, forgiveness, and redemption. The story of Robert. And Gloria didn't end there, of course. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, but it was a beginning filled with hope, with purpose, and with a love that had proven to be stronger than any darkness. And sometimes, that's the happiest ending anyone can hope for. Not the absence of scars, but the certainty that they have been transformed into something beautiful. Not the forgetting of the past, but the strength to build a better future. Not perfection, but presence. Not invincibility, but humanity. And so as the lights of New York City began to twinkle in the night, illuminating the gigantic metropolis, Robert and Gloria remained on their small balcony, in their small garden, living their small, great life. And it was perfect. End of story. Dear listeners, We hope the story of Robert and Gloria has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, forgiveness, and family love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Perhaps it was Gloria's strength, Robert's transformation, or the message about valuing those we love while we still can. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, making us reflect on our own choices and relationships. We'll see you in the next episode.